The sun had just begun its slow crawl behind the eastern hills of Lake Crest, spilling golden streaks across the calm waters, when I first noticed the bridge. Not the bridge itself, I had crossed it countless times, but the absence of something I had built with my own hands. Timber, steel, sweat. My bridge, my shortcut, my lifeline, reduced to splinters and chaos. The morning mist clung to the shattered planks like a shroud, and the faint echo of broken wood snapping under some unseen weight still lingered in the air. I parked my old Chevy Silverado at the edge of what remained and stared. The bridge had connected my property, the small parcel my grandfather had left me, to the main road. It was the only way to reach my land without slogging through knee-deep mud or risking $100 tow for a private contractor's ferry. And now it was gone, destroyed overnight. "You're kidding me," I muttered, running a hand through my hair, already feeling that familiar surge of rage. The HOA had done this. There was no other explanation. Clear-cut the morning before, I'd received the notice tucked under my front door: bridge does not comply with HOA regulations. Removal ordered immediately. The message was polite, sterile even, but the intent was clear. Punish me. Erase my work. Assert their control over something they had no right to touch. My name is Ethan Walker, and I didn't take kindly to people stepping on what was mine. It wasn't just a bridge. It was the principle. The hours of blood, sweat, and backbreaking labor. I had built that bridge to keep my daughter, Lila, safe when she came to visit, to keep her from wandering into the swampy edges of our property. And now, the HOA, led by their self-important president, Margaret Langston, had torn it down without so much as a warning. I paced the shoreline, scanning the million-dollar estates lining the lake, the mansions with their manicured lawns, the private docks where pontoon boats bobbed lazily in the morning light. These people thought they could control everything. Dictate what we could build, where we could park, what we could touch. For a moment, I hated them all equally. And then I saw her, Margaret Langston herself, standing on her sprawling dock, sipping something iced and looking at me with that patented condescending smile. She waved, as if she were the one wronged, as if destroying my bridge had been an act of charity. I wanted to toss a rock so hard it would land in her pristine fountain, but instead I just clenched my fists and muttered, "Just you wait." I drove back into town, the truck tires kicking up dust along the winding road, my mind working like a machine set to revenge mode. The idea came as suddenly as the first sip of bitter coffee in the morning: if they wanted a war, I would give them one they couldn't ignore. I began digging through property records, permits, and old auctions. Every detail mattered. Every loophole mattered. 3 days later, I had a plan that made the cold satisfaction crawl up my spine. It wasn't petty. It wasn't small. It was meticulous. I would not only repair what they had destroyed, I would turn the tables in a way they couldn't imagine. By the following weekend, I was standing in the offices of Harrison and Company Realty, staring at a stack of documents that made me feel both euphoric and slightly unhinged. My target, the lakefront estates of the HOA board. All of them, collectively valued at over $7 million. The key, the dam controlling water levels in the lake itself. Ethan, the broker, Randy Chambers, said, peering over his glasses. He was a stocky man with the kind of smile that suggested he had seen this kind of determination before, but rarely in someone so unrelenting. "You know what you're talking about, right? Buying the dam? That's not a weekend project. That's..." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I interrupted, my voice low and firm. I couldn't let doubt creep in now. Once I own the dam, I control the water. And that water is what keeps their precious waterfront properties valuable. Randy raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with me was pointless. The paperwork was extensive. Surveys, ownership titles, environmental assessments. By the end of the week, I had handed over my savings, signed the dotted line, and become the proud and terrifyingly powerful owner of the dam. A structure that had been nothing more than a utility for decades, invisible to most, now my instrument of justice. Driving back to the lake, I could feel the weight of what I had done. The dam gates, rusted and heavy, seemed almost symbolic, a final barrier between me and the board members who had dared to interfere with my life. I stepped onto the concrete walkway, hands brushing the cold metal, and let a small, private smile creep across my face. This isn't just about water, I murmured to myself. This is about respect. About accountability. By midweek, I had enlisted a small crew to help me maintain the dam, run inspections, and ensure I had total operational control. I learned quickly how delicate the water systems were, how a minor miscalculation could flood lowlands or worse, dry them up entirely. And that's exactly why I had smiled when the idea struck. Controlling water meant controlling property value. By extension, controlling their wealth. The first time I tested it, the results were instantaneous. I released a fraction of the water from the upstream reservoirs, and within hours, one of the HOA's prized estates, belonging to Victor and Sylvia DeLuca, began to see their private dock sink slowly into the mud. The pontoon boat listing, the neatly trimmed hedges crumbling at the edges, nature taking its course at my command. I didn't feel guilty. I felt justified. Word spread quickly through the HOA, and Margaret Langston herself came storming to the edge of my property. Her voice, sharp and high-pitched, cut through the air like a siren. "Ethan Walker! What do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "This is illegal. You can't." "I already can," I said simply, watching as her prized landscaping became a soggy mess. "You destroyed my bridge." "I merely returned the favor, on a scale you can actually see." Her face went pale. Not because she understood the power I now wielded, but because she realized she was helpless. And helplessness is a uniquely humbling feeling for someone like Margaret Langston. As I stood there, watching the water creep across lawns and docks, I felt something I hadn't in years: pure, unfiltered control. A rush that made the morning sun glint off the rippling water in ways that almost seemed cinematic, almost as if the universe itself had staged this moment for me. This was only the beginning. Because bridges can be rebuilt, gates can be opened, and water can be controlled, but what comes next, I realized, is the true test. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. But escalation. And I was ready to see how far the ripple would go. The following week, Lake Crest became a different place entirely. The water, once serene and reflective like a polished mirror, now rippled with a subtle tension, as if the lake itself was aware of the power I now wielded. Word of my dam purchase had spread like wildfire through the HOA grapevine, whispered in manicured kitchens and echoing down long corridors of gated estates. Margaret Langston, their self-appointed commander-in-chief, had convened an emergency board meeting, but their panic only made me more methodical. I watched from my land, perched atop the hill near the rebuilt bridge, sipping black coffee and observing the slow transformation of their paradise. Victor DeLuca's pontoon boat had been stranded in mud for 3 days. Sylvia DeLuca had stormed into the town office, demanding legal action, only to be told that technically, I had done nothing illegal. Ownership of the dam granted me all the rights I needed. The law had handed me a weapon, I intended to wield it with precision. The first time Margaret herself approached my property, she had been furious. Her heels clicked on the concrete like gunshots as she confronted me. "Ethan Walker! You don't understand what you're doing. You'll ruin everything. People will hate you." "I understand perfectly," I replied, my voice steady, calm. "And if they hate me, it's only because they couldn't act when it mattered. You destroyed my bridge. I'm simply returning the courtesy, scaled appropriately." Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the controlled facade. I knew that look, it was the moment someone realizes their control is gone. And I could see it in her eyes, fear. I began systematically testing the limits of the lake. Small adjustments at first, a few inches of water lowered or raised here and there. Each day, the HOA received panicked messages about dock stability, water levels, and erosion risks. The $7 million waterfront estates were built on prestige, not resilience. And prestige was fragile. At night, I would sit on the porch with Lila. She was only 9, but sharp enough to notice the quiet shift in my mood. "Daddy," she asked one evening, "why is everyone mad at you?" I smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Because, Pumpkin, sometimes people think they can control what isn't theirs. And sometimes, they need to be reminded who's really in charge." Her eyes widened, a mixture of curiosity and caution.
So, you're not being mean?
No, I said softly.
I'm being fair. Justice doesn't always look nice. Sometimes it looks like water creeping over docks. The next escalation came on a Tuesday morning.
I had received an anonymous tip from one of the local contractors, someone who hated the HOA as much as I did, that the Langstons had been holding secret gatherings, trying to negotiate legal loopholes to regain dam control.
I smiled. Their panic was growing, and desperation clouds judgment. I decided it was time for a more direct demonstration.
Using the dam's sluice gates, I released a controlled surge toward a section of the shoreline occupied by Margaret's prized waterfront estate. Within hours, her dock began listing dangerously. The water lapped at the foundations, seeping into the carefully curated gardens, turning emerald lawns into muddied chaos.
Margaret called immediately, fury in every word. Ethan! Stop this right now. You'll ruin everything. People are talking. People are noticing who actually built and who destroyed, I said evenly. I didn't destroy your property. Nature did. I just redirected it.
Her silence after that was almost musical. She had no retort because she realized that I wasn't bluffing.
And in that silence, I could hear the tension of victory.
Soon, other HOA members began reaching out. Daniel and Teresa Holden, a couple who prided themselves on being arbiters of taste and control, had their boathouse partially submerged.
Sylvia DeLuca's driveway was now a miniature marsh.
The email chains, the calls, the frantic pleas, they all arrived at my inbox in rapid succession.
I responded only once to each, a simple line of truth. You destroyed what was mine. I am merely responding in kind. Consider this an object lesson. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore.
Watching the domino effect, I realized something more profound. Power, real power, came not from wealth or social standing, but from control over the elements themselves. And I, Ethan Walker, now had it in spades. Margaret, of course, didn't surrender quietly. She called in lawyers, engineers, and environmental consultants.
She tried everything: threats, lawsuits, official complaints. But every attempt failed.
Legally, I had all the rights. Technically, I had done nothing illegal.
Strategically, I had anticipated every move.
She grew desperate, almost manic, pacing her mansion in the middle of the night, shouting orders to assistants who looked at her as if she had finally snapped. One evening, I caught sight of her standing on her dock, staring at the water I controlled. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson, and she looked small, frail, diminished.
I felt a pang of something. Was it guilt? No. It was understanding. This is what fear does to people who've spent their lives wielding control like a shield. Now that shield was gone. That night, I met with Randy Chambers at the local diner. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs.
"You've gone further than I thought, Ethan," he said, sliding a plate of pancakes toward me.
Controlling water, forcing them to panic, it's genius. But be careful. People who have nothing to lose can be dangerous.
I nodded, listening, but not worried.
I'm not done yet. There's one more step. The final step wasn't immediate. It required patience, timing, and subtlety.
Over the next few days, I worked quietly, inspecting the dam, adjusting gates in minute increments.
I documented every change, every result.
By controlling the water levels, I could effectively render the HOA's entire investment worthless without ever breaking a law or committing a crime.
By the end of the week, the lakefront estates were no longer desirable.
Sloppy docks, mud-caked lawns, and stagnant water replaced the pristine images once advertised in brochures. By the following Sunday, Margaret Langston had scheduled an emergency meeting on her own dock. I drove over, my Chevy rolling slowly toward her estate. She came out, dressed in her designer clothes, with an entourage of lawyers and board members in tow.
She tried the same condescending tone.
"This ends now, Ethan," she said, glaring at me.
"This stops. Or I swear.
Or you'll have to live with it," I interrupted, my gaze fixed on the slowly rising water behind me.
You want the bridge? I'll rebuild it. You want your docks dry? That's your problem now. Every action has consequences, Margaret. You chose yours. Her face went pale. She realized then that my victory wasn't just a fluke. It was inevitable. As I drove away that evening, Lila leaning against me in the passenger seat, I felt an unfamiliar weight lift from my chest. The anger, the frustration, the fury, all of it had been channeled into a precise, unstoppable force. The HOA had underestimated me. The lake had listened. And I had won. But somewhere deep down, I knew the final act had yet to play out. The dam was mine, the water was mine, but the real test, the confrontation that would ensure no one ever tried to cross me again, was still ahead. And I intended to see it through, not with chaos, but with certainty. Because in the end, the lake had taught me something simple but powerful: true control isn't taken by force alone. It's taken by knowing exactly what to control and having the patience to see the ripple effects unfold. And the ripple had only just begun. The sun had barely touched the horizon when I returned to the lake, my boots crunching over gravel and debris. The air was heavy, damp with the scent of water and earth. Lake Crest no longer mirrored the calm serenity it had once promised. The surface rippled with subtle menace, hinting at the quiet chaos I now orchestrated. The estates that once gleamed like trophies now looked vulnerable, fragile, and ridiculous in their pretense of control. Margaret Langston's fury had reached a fever pitch. Word had spread of my escalation, gates subtly shifted to lower water levels, docks sagging into mud, boathouses partially submerged. Her social dominance, her authority over Lake Crest, had eroded. Even her closest allies, once smug and confident, looked at her with uncertainty. And she, of course, knew who to blame. I had anticipated every move, every demand, every desperate attempt at negotiation. That's what made the day feel cinematic, like the final scene in a thriller where the villain realizes the hero cannot be stopped. Except I wasn't the hero, not exactly. I was the storm. I parked at the edge of the lake and climbed the small hill leading to the dam. From here, the panorama was breathtaking, but not in the traditional sense. The sight of mud-caked lawns, tilting docks, and stagnant water stretching across the once pristine properties was satisfaction enough. I took a deep breath and imagined the panic on their faces. Margaret appeared first, striding toward me, her heels sinking into the soggy grass at the waterline. Beside her, a team of engineers and attorneys followed, briefcases and clipboards in hand. The wind whipped her hair, and for a moment, I thought she might actually confront me physically. But no, her war was words, threats, and desperate pleas. "This ends now, Ethan," she barked, pointing a manicured finger. "You have no right to manipulate the water like this. If you don't." "I already do," I said calmly, cutting her off. My gaze swept across the lake. "Every drop, every inch, belongs to me now. You destroyed my bridge. You tried to control what wasn't yours. Now, you see the consequences." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. I had prepared for this moment, and patience had its rewards. I stepped closer to the sluice gates and slowly began opening them, releasing a controlled surge that pushed toward the Langston estate. The dock heaved and tilted further, wooden beams groaning as if protesting the new reality. Margaret's assistants gasped. The lawyers scribbled notes furiously. Margaret herself froze, her face drained of color. You can't," she screamed. "I can," I said simply. And I did. Legally. Strategically. Unavoidably. I walked along the dam, explaining every decision to the group, even as panic mounted in their expressions. Each estate, each lawn, each dock had been affected just enough to send a message, to strip away the illusion of safety and control. This wasn't personal. It was poetic. By mid-morning, the board had convened at the edge of the lake. Margaret and her allies stood there, silent, calculating. They had no choice but to listen as I outlined my plan, a full restoration of the bridge on my land, but only if they acknowledged my rights, my ownership of the dam, and the consequences of overstepping boundaries in the future. "You will do this," I said, gesturing toward the rebuilt bridge. "And you will respect what is mine."
Otherwise, your properties remain at the mercy of the water I control.
Margaret's voice trembled. And if we refuse?
I smiled faintly, eyes on the sluice gates. Then the lake continues to speak. There was silence.
Long, oppressive silence.
Then, one by one, the HOA members began nodding.
Not out of agreement, but fear.
Respect had never worked for them, power had. And today, power belonged to me.
After the formal acknowledgement, I oversaw the reopening of the bridge. It stood stronger than before, a testament not only to engineering but to resilience and determination.
Lila ran across it, laughing as though she owned the world, and I followed, feeling a deep sense of vindication. The lake had returned to a calm state, but the lesson had been learned. The HOA's public image was tarnished, their perfection a fragile illusion now permanently marred by their own hubris. Margaret Langston would never again look at me, or anyone else, without a sense of caution. I had shifted the balance of power, and in doing so, secured a hard-won respect. The true beauty, however, was in the subtlety. No homes were destroyed beyond repair. No lawsuits could hold because everything had been technically legal. Justice, in its purest form, need not be violent to leave a lasting impact. I had rebuilt what was mine, taught the powerful a lesson, and controlled the narrative in a way they could not challenge. That evening, I sat on the hill overlooking the lake with Lila, watching the sun set in flames of gold and crimson. She rested her head against my shoulder, still unaware of the full magnitude of what had transpired.
"Daddy," she asked softly, "did we win?"
"We did," I said, holding her close.
"But sometimes, winning isn't about beating them, it's about making them understand."
The wind whispered across the water, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not revenge, not anger, but a quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that balance had been restored. I had turned destruction into creation, anger into strategy, and humiliation into respect. As darkness fell over Lake Crest, I realized the bridge I had rebuilt was more than wood and steel. It was a symbol of resilience, of patience, of standing your ground against those who would trample what is yours. The HOA had learned that lesson, and I had taught it well. And somewhere deep in the heart of Lake Crest, I smiled, knowing that I had finally taken control of what was mine, protected my family, and reminded everyone that sometimes, the quietest people hold the greatest power. The lake shimmered in the fading light, reflecting a truth that was as simple as it was profound: respect is earned, boundaries are defended, and sometimes, the water carries more justice than any court ever could.